The newest issue of Population Control is out now, with Bill Gates having invested in a malaria vaccine and genetically modified mosquitoes, which is interesting because this is the first time we've seen malaria in the United States in decades. But is this really something that should surprise us, or is it more of a long decades play in power? We're going to do a deep dive into this today on The Michael Wilson Show.
From the American Beacon Studios, this is The Michael Wilson Show.
So we'll get into the Bill Gates fiasco later, but I think it's pertinent to start at the beginning of all of this. Going to go back in history a little ways. I think that's the most important thing we could possibly do. So to do that, I think we're going to jump back to Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood. Now, I think there's a lot to cover here, but I think that it's pertinent to start with before she ever started the company and talk about what she was all about. So here's a quote from Margaret Sanger. Quote, "We do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population." That was in a letter written from Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger to Dr. C.J. Gamble on December 10th, 1939. In 1919, Margaret Sanger appealed to eugenicists for birth control, which was in her mind a solution for racial betterment. Take that how you may. She founded the American Birth Control League in 1921 with Clarence Cook Little and Lothrop Stoddard. And Stoddard actually was a white supremacist and had written a book on white supremacy. So, I mean, it's undebatable. Sanger admitted she planned to eliminate the unfit while striving to create a race of thoroughbreds. And that was the whole tagline of her magazine, which was entitled The Birth Control Review. So this wasn't hidden. This isn't, info that is tough to come by or understand. This is pretty clear and upfront, and it's pretty obvious if you look at all what Margaret Sanger was about. It's not debatable. It's not a conspiracy theory from QAnon like The Sound of Freedom is, apparently. No, this is bigger than that. This is out in the open, fully honest. This was what Margaret Sanger was about. Okay, in 1939, Sanger launched the Negro Project. That was the official term, in order to educate African Americans about birth control with an end goal of cutting the birth rate among blacks. So again, this was out in the open. She was openly for the eugenics of the black population. This was what Margaret Sanger was all about. She founded Planned Parenthood with the goal of controlling the birth rates of black Americans for, as she put it, racial betterment. Okay, Clarence Gamble, which, if that last name sounds familiar, yes, that is the future of the company of Procter and Gamble, assisted Sanger in her endeavors because he'd already funded other birth control ventures in other states with the goal of, quote, bettering North Carolina's future generation by rectifying the current unsatisfactory differential birth rate. If that's unclear to you what that might mean, the differential birth rate, in other words, is the difference and the fact that there's too many black Americans being born in his mind. In the Supreme Court case, Box v. Planned Parenthood of Indiana and Kentucky, Justice Thomas, the legend, revealed that abortion was furthering the eugenics goal of its founder, Margaret Sanger. So again, it was well known. It was well documented. There was not really much debate about it. There was a lot of debate as to whether or not it was still a good thing, which there shouldn't have been, but there was. But it was pretty well admitted by everybody that the goal of Planned Parenthood, not only racism, but population control specifically from her mind of the black population, but on a grander scheme of things, it was population control. That was the entire point. It wasn't to help people. It wasn't to benefit the people that participated. It wasn't for anything like that. The whole point was population control. Okay, in case you thought that was just old, in case you thought that everything I'm reading is just, okay, that's old news. We don't care about that anymore. It doesn't really matter. You'd be wrong. It's not a myth, and it's not over. Planned Parenthood, even today, still hands out the Margaret Sanger Award, and the company still worships her quote-unquote visionary accomplishments, which include the Negro Project. So they're not today like, oh, no, that was a serious amount of racism and eugenics, and it's absolutely awful. Today we stand for peace, prosperity, and family planning. That's not at all what they're about. They're still absolutely racist. They're still absolutely for population control, and they're still admitting it. It's not like, oh, they're hiding it. It's still evident from the day of its founding to today. It is still evident. Moving on, I think we can talk about this a little bit more. Margaret Sanger, if it wasn't obvious enough already how she was, referred to those she wanted to get rid of as, and these are quoted words, the unsuitable, human weeds, the feeble-minded, incompetent masses, and the faulty. Okay? But they're keeping around Planned Parenthood. Why? Because they want, and here's the bigger play here. They want to have a picturesque version, right? They want to look good. That's the whole point of social justice. They want to look good by banning things like Aunt Jemima pancakes because it's racist, or you know, the butter lady, the Native American butter lady. They want to ban those things because it looks good. But they're entirely unwilling to ban things like Planned Parenthood because it's more about an agenda than it is about doing the right thing. Hence why Planned Parenthood is still around, still admitting these things, and despite the fact that the woman who founded it literally said that black people were delinquents, faulty, and they were never going to be human beings practically. Her words, the fact that that's still around tells you everything you need to know about the social justice warriors. It's also, this is really interesting, this is a good tie-in in case any of you are into conspiracy theories, or as I now refer to them, truth. Bill Gates' father, whose name was William Gates Sr., was head of Planned Parenthood when Bill Gates was a child, which is interesting because he actually admitted that in an interview decades ago, and the interview has been completely scrubbed from the internet. It's incredibly difficult to find, but it's true. William Gates Sr. was head of Planned Parenthood. He was on the board when Bill Gates was a child. So if you think that the population control isn't all part of a bigger plan, and it isn't all about power, you'd be incredibly mistaken because it's all connected. Birth control, condoms, and abortion are now considered absolutely normal. So you have to understand, prior to Planned Parenthood, you know, handing out birth control and being all about abortion, these things weren't normal. Families weren't planned. They weren't controlled. There was no families that were like, nah, I don't really want this many. That was never an option in people's minds, how many kids you were going to have. Nobody asked, how many kids do you want? And they were like, oh, I'll have 3. And if I have more than 3, I'll go get a vasectomy. I'll go tie my tubes. That wasn't a thing prior to Planned Parenthood. It just wasn't because people wanted big families. Okay, so it's not only been an impact on black communities, which it absolutely has. Okay, it's been a racist impact on black communities. But if we're going to pretend like somehow this hasn't been a bigger cultural impact of having tiny families and about population control, then we're not looking at the bigger picture. Okay, that's just from Planned Parenthood. I mean, we could talk about China too, right? Because in China, now they've reversed it. In 2021, they made it, you know, the 3-child policy that you can only have 3 children, which is already still a tiny family. Like that's still not a huge upgrade from what they had before. But if you don't remember, I mean, when I was a kid, I remember the policy going in that there could only be 1 child if you were Chinese, right? And the fines for if you had more than 1 child were extremely crazy. And by crazy, I mean it was multiple times the annual income of the average family were the fines if you got caught with having more than 1 child. Okay, so people were fleeing, hiding kids, right? So it's not just a national problem, it's an international problem, and it's actually quite comedic because they thought they had a good plan with population control in China, right? They banned it down to one child per family was the rule, and then their birth rates dropped so low that they realized they weren't reproducing enough. They realized that it would be a threat to their own country, that they wouldn't have enough, you know, military or people working, and so they raised it up to 3. So they're still doing population control, but they're doing population control and mixing it with, okay, but we also still need a certain number of people just to survive. So they're still doing population control. They just realized that it couldn't be as quite eccentric as they wanted it to be. Okay, so we talked about Planned Parenthood and China. Let's take a look at the LGBTQ community, because I think this is a pretty ignored one. We talk about the LGBT community all the time, right? Like we talk about how awful it is what they're doing to children, right? We talk about how it's been a multi-generational problem and how it's gotten worse and worse until now it's in our schools. Now we're promoting, you know, drag shows for kids, you know, sterilizing children. I think that there's more than just that. I think that this also funnels into the population control debate. And the reason I think that is multifaceted. And here's what I mean. So for starters, we already know that when you get the tranny surgery or mutilated, that it significantly reduces fertility, if not getting rid of it entirely. We don't just know that because of the science, but we have people who have detransitioned, who literally talk about the fact that they are never going to have kids. It's never going to happen. I mean, even if they weren't going to die way sooner than everybody else, they're not going to have kids up until that point anyways. So it completely sterilizes the people that get it, and they want this for kids. They want children to make the decision to be sterilized permanently before they're even an age where they understand what sterilization means. I guarantee the age that they want people to be mutilated is before the age that they can spell mutilated or sterilized. They have no idea what they're doing, but they want them to do it before they understand the consequences. And the people that are old enough to understand, they don't tell the consequences to. There's no talk of it. We know that from interviews we've had. If you've watched the What is a Woman documentary, which is an incredible film, and I would urge every single one of you watching the show, if you haven't seen it already, go watch it. If you've seen it already, watch it again, because it is incredibly enlightening. And there's a man on there who is a detransitioner, who talks about the damages incurred. And when he was asked if there was any talk about the side effects or anything like that, he says, absolutely not. There was no talk about it at all. Not only was it minimalized, it wasn't even brought up. It wasn't part of the discussion at all. And that is exactly what they are doing. Not only are they doing it to kids before kids can understand, but they're doing it to adults and not telling them that there are any kind of side effects whatsoever. They don't want them to know. So if you think that the transgender ideology is evil, you're correct. But I think that there's something way, way more sinister at play than just it being, oh, you can be trans if you have gender dysphoria. I think that this is absolutely a huge part of population control, because they are convincing entire generations that completely mutilating yourself to the point where you will never have children and can't reproduce is morally acceptable, while also not telling them that their surgeries do that. But it's even greater than that. So that's just the transgender part of the LGBTQ cult. What about normalizing gay marriage? I know this is often not talked about in conservative circles because it's a taboo topic, right? Like I don't want to be associated with the conservatives that did this, but a while back, conservatives normalized gay marriage and kind of conceded that line, which is absolutely ridiculous. Any conservative I see that conceded that line because it's not our business, you're a coward. I'm saying that to you point blank right now. You're a coward. Okay, unless you actually believe it, in which case you're ignorant. Here's why I mean that. One, I think it probably is into the population control because, again, obviously, if you're gay, you can't have kids. You can't procreate. You can't. Unless you use surrogacy, which is another moral evil. So you circumvent the moral evil you're already doing, and you still want kids. So you circumvent that to do another, possibly even greater moral evil, which is treat children like objects and force women to carry them. Like they're also objects. Going back to the gay marriage topic, I think that all of this plays into population control, and it's why they force it as a part of culture. We've kind of fought on the front of transgender ideology, but for all the conservatives that were like, oh no, gay marriage is totally okay, it's not our business, ridiculous. Okay, we defined marriage, and then we changed it. If you're upset that they changed the definition of a woman in the Merriam-Webster dictionary to include transgenders, you should be just as upset that we officially changed the definition of marriage. Because if you think that marriage was just, oh, it's two people who think they love each other, they're going to be living together, that's not the definition of marriage. Anyone can pretend to love someone else and live in a building with them. That's not cool. Roommates meet the definition. I mean, if you're rooming with your best friend, do you love them? Yes. Are you rooming together? Yes. Okay, that's a ridiculous definition. The definition of marriage for literally thousands of years was a man and a woman joining together in holy matrimony before God in covenant till death do they part for the purpose of procreation. Now, this is not to say there aren't exceptions to that rule. Obviously, if you're, barren, you can't have kids, that's understandable. But the entire purpose of marriage from the beginning of the world was to join in a covenant under God that you would never leave for the purpose of being fruitful and multiplying. Gay marriage doesn't meet that. Gay marriage is like transgender woman. It cannot exist because it does not meet the definition. We conceded that point, and it was a ridiculous concession. I am willing to at least hear out the conservatives that said I was okay with gay people being gay in the privacy of their own homes. But for the conservatives that were okay with legalizing gay marriage, you completely changed the definition of the word marriage. And you are the reason that they are comfortable changing the definition of the word woman to include those who were born with a penis. Because we conceded that it is okay to change definitions to meet the cultural tide. That's what we did with gay marriage. Okay, all this to say, the LGBT cult clearly plays in huge with population control. Every single part of them, every single part of it. It's all about making sure that the people can't procreate, whether you're gay, whether you're lesbian, whether you're transgender, all of it is with the express purpose of making sure that they can't procreate at all. I think that is a much ignored part of this cult. is that it is part of this population control. Okay, I think that it goes even beyond that, because even for normal people that are not part of the LGBTQ cult, okay, the food we are being fed, if you haven't done the research on this, I would urge you to do so, because this is, I think this is even bigger than a lot of what's going on in our culture. The food they give you, the water they give you, that by the way is laced with estrogen. And this is super interesting, because when I was younger, not that much younger, I saw the meme where Alex Jones was saying the tap water turns the freaking frogs gay. And it's really comedic, because as it turns out, the estrogen that is flowing through the water, which is a side effect of women using birth control, is passed on to males. And in frogs, it actually does emasculate them. It actually does turn them more feminine. Some of them have even turned transgender, right? Like, it's absolutely baffling. And everyone made fun of him. I mean, it's still a funny clip. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's absolutely hilarious the way he said it. You can definitely meme it if you want. But the fact of the matter is that it absolutely is happening. It's undoubtable that it's happening, okay? So it's in the tap water. It's in the food they're feeding us. And the proof of this is in the pudding, right? Because the only thing that's really changed is the food and the waters, everything like that. And yet we have noticeable proof that sperm rates have dropped by 50% in the last 50 years. Okay, if that's not a dire warning to us that the things they're feeding us and giving us to drink are killing us, are ending us, are heading us for extinction, then I don't know what to tell you. Because apart from everything else they're doing, between abortion, normalizing birth control and condoms and all the rest, the fact that even the people that are avoiding all of those things and the societal pressure, even those people are still being poisoned and dropping fertility rates in those people. So you can actively choose not to participate in the LGBTQ cult. You can actively choose not to participate in family planning and the normalization of Planned Parenthood, which is ridiculous. You can choose not to be a part of that. But even when you choose that, they're still poisoning you against your will, so that the rates of you having children are dropping by 50% every 50 years. It's incredibly dark. It's incredibly sinister. It's incredibly evil. And we're just ignoring it and pretending like it isn't happening. Like, yeah, I get we have to focus on what's harming our kids right now, which is the transgender ideology and this ridiculous LGBTQ movement. But it's more than that, because they're making it where we can't have kids at all. And when we do have kids, they make fun of us. Have you heard the trend of the millennial, the childless millennials? Because there's a lot of them, it's becoming a trend now to be a childless millennial. It's funny because I make fun of them. If you're actively choosing not to have kids and whatnot, I make fun of you. But here, I have a video to pull up, because this is really interesting. And this is being normalized. Okay, let's watch this video. This video is entitled Philosophies of a Childless Millennial. Okay? Let's watch this. Let's watch this. It says, my life philosophies as a childless millennial. Candles are the new plants. Okay, I don't mind if you have candles, but it gets better. Plants are the new pets. And pets are the new children. I mean, that's a cute cat, but it's a pet. It's an animal. That's really funny. Dancing fruit, I play that for my son. Okay, let's end the video. Okay, I play that for my son, but that's irrelevant, because I actually have a son. Okay, I have an actual child that isn't an animal. But this is being normalized. And I'm not hating on people that love animals at all. But if we're going to pretend like animals are children, they are doing that on purpose. They're normalizing it on purpose, because if you feel comfortable having a cat instead of a child, and you don't have to go through childbirth and raising a kid and paying for kids, they are normalizing it so that even the people that can have kids, that aren't part of this cult movement that has sterilized people, and even if they're not getting abortions, well, now they can choose just not to have kids in general. And they want to choose it because they're making this look better. Having animals, having pets become children. They're actually legitimately believing it. And it's absolutely baffling to me. They're normalizing euthanasia. Okay. This is a whole nother thing. They're normalizing euthanasia. You have made in Canada, where, I saw the TikTok a while back of the girl and her grandma was getting euthanized, right? Murdered was her grandma was getting murdered. And she was like, oh, we're so excited. This is going to be great. It's going to end her suffering. She's going to be so happy. And it's like, dude, humans were made to suffer. Okay. You can't avoid suffering by killing someone. But that's the same argument for abortion, right? So I mean, if we oppose euthanasia, we have to also oppose abortion because they're the same argument, and any kind of potential suffering for the sake and any kind of life for the sake of ending potential suffering, right? Don't have that kid because it could go into the foster care system and be abused, right? So kill it instead. All right, now the Bill Gates story. I've already talked about this in one of my articles or in one of my videos, but one of my episodes. But I think it's absolutely important that in this episode we go over it again. So 20 years ago, there was JFK Jr. And he had a political lifestyle magazine, and he interviewed a number of celebrities, politicians, culturally significant people. One of them was including Bill Gates. And it was published with a sensational title, Bill Gates Talks to John Kennedy About Murdoch Money and World Domination. That was in 1997. Bill Gates was 41 years old and was already holding the title of the richest man in the world. He was asked about his goals, aspirations, and politics, and his answer was that he funded population control, and that was a big deal for him. Fast forward to now, and he wrote an opinion edition in the Washington Journal in 2019, and he states that 20 years ago, he made the best investment he's ever made, which of course lines up with the time that he said population control was what he was starting to fund. Okay. He's given $10 billion into organizations for vaccines and the Global Fund. And he's obsessed with vaccines and mosquitoes. Okay. Both come with risks. But when news broke recently, by the way, that malaria had been detected in Texas and Florida, and that those who had contracted it hadn't traveled outside the U.S., so they didn't get it from somewhere else. They got it from something in Florida or Texas. It's worth noting that in these two states in recent years, Bill Gates funded billions of genetically modified mosquitoes to be released in these specific two states. So there's a lot of liberals who are saying you don't have proof. There's no proof that Bill Gates is funding population control still. There's no proof that, the mosquitoes have given anyone malaria. If you are stupid enough to think that somehow Bill Gates, who is a fan, admittedly out loud, of population control, funded genetically modified mosquitoes, and then for the first time in decades, the same states where the mosquitoes were released now has malaria, and the people who got the malaria didn't travel outside of the United States. If you think somehow that Bill Gates is not to blame for malaria, you are stupid, because he's also funding a malaria vaccine. This is ridiculous. Okay. Oxitec, the company altering the DNA, is funded by Bill Gates, of course. Oxitec is a proud partner of the World Economic Forum. We've talked about them before. Okay. So he funds population control. He released millions of genetically modified mosquitoes into Florida and Texas. Malaria returns to the U.S. only in Florida and Texas, and he is now working on a vaccine in December of 2022 that he was going to call safe and effective, of course, funded by Bill Gates himself. Okay, so the big question we have left about all of this is why? Why are they doing all of this? Okay. Is it to fix climate change? Because that's one of the big arguments, right? We're trying to fix climate change. We don't melt the ice caps. Greta Thunberg says that we're all going to die from the sun if we don't stop with the cars and the cow farts. And yet, every single one of them is flying private jets, okay? A video surfaced just this week of Socialist Prime Minister of Spain flying to the climate conference in a private jet, taking a fleet of cars up to the frickin' 200 feet from where the climate conference is, the doors. And then she got out of the car and got on a bicycle to ride up to the doors. If you think these are the people concerned about climate change, you're an idiot. Okay. How about another example? Is it to save resources? Is that why? There's absolutely no evidence that we have a lack of resources, and every claim they've ever made about a lack of resources is absolutely ridiculous and is found to be false within seconds. Okay. Is it a lack of room? That's been an argument I've heard from people that are all for population control. We don't have enough room in the world for all these people. Look at China, where they're living on top of each other. And look at, these are the same people that want to have open borders. Stop listening to their arguments. Okay? I was taught something from a young age. You know what that thing was? Don't listen to hypocrites. Okay? Make your own decisions, make your own arguments, but do not sit there and let someone lecture you on how we don't have enough room here. Who is advocating for open borders and letting people in? Don't listen to them. Okay? They want us to eat bugs, to virtue signal our lack of resources, but they're the ones taking all the resources. Bill Gates is the single largest owner of farmland in the United States. We have plenty of resources. They're saying cow farts are to blame for climate change, and then they tell us that bugs and lab-grown chicken is the only solution because we can't have cows anymore. My personal position on the real reason that I think that population control is so important to them, it has nothing to do with, resources, climate change. Those are all stupid hoaxes that are here with the direct intent to control us. My personal position on why they're funding population control, why it is so important to them, is that fewer people are easier to control. They get more of whatever they want. Wealth, power, control, whatever it is that they want, they get more of it the less people that there are. The question that faces us is, what can we possibly do to stop it? For starters, and this is going to sound, I already know that if I ever have a ton of people listening to me, Media Matters, infamous company for misrepresenting everything a conservative has ever said, is going to come after me and quote this right here, because they've done it to Matt Walsh, something he said a decade ago they've quoted. Okay, they're going to quote what I'm about to say. I think that we can outbreed them. I'm not kidding. I think we absolutely can, and I'm not sorry for saying that. I think that it is absolutely true that we can outbreed them. If we have more kids than them, one, we're stopping their population control. Two, the next generation is going to be raised on the values that we believe. Okay, so we can outbreed them. I personally plan on having as many kids as God will allow me to have. I'm 21 years old. I already have one child who's beautiful and 9 months old. I plan on having as many more as God will allow me to have. I can have my own private militia. This is half a joke, but I can have my own private militia to protect and strengthen each other, right? I want my boys to have a brotherhood because they fear that. That's another thing they fear. They fear strong, godly, independent, courageous young men. They hate brotherhood. They fear people like that they cannot control. That is why Andrew Tate is being treated so badly, right? Why is he in jail? Or he's not in jail. He's now on house arrest, which isn't too much better. Why was he in jail and now on house arrest, despite the fact that they've released absolutely no evidence? Why? Because he has brotherhood with his brother Tristan Tate, because he doesn't listen to them, because he speaks out against them, because they cannot control a strong man with people behind him. They can't. They fear it because everything they've been fighting for decades, everything from the beginning with Margaret Sanger through Bill Gates' dad, everything they've been doing has been to shut all of it down. And people like Andrew Tate, hopefully people like me, are a threat to them. And I think that there's something really funny, and I'm going to say this once. Transing the kids sunk their ship. Honestly, they were doing a bang-up job for generations. I don't think many people, there were conspiracy theorists catching on, whatever. And then they started transitioning children. And all of a sudden, people like Andrew Tate started popping up. Conservatives got all the more popular. We started doing more, fighting for it against this population myth. We started fighting again. Because we realized that they took it one step too far, and now we're going back through everything else they've done, investigating it and saying this is ridiculous. So now what they've done is they've created women are wanting to homestead again. Men are wanting to work hard for women again. We're wanting to be strong, tough. We're actually going to have an episode on that coming out later, where I'm going to go in depth about masculinity and how it's making a comeback because of them. But for now, just understand that they did all of this. Population control is not a myth. Everything lines up, okay? But we can stop it. Seriously, we can stop it. I'll see you guys on the next episode.